Can you see it? Just checking.
Yes, very clear.
Brilliant. So I'm now talking about working with meaning in life in psychological therapies. This workshop will be a combination of some theory and some practical exercises. Those practical exercises are mainly some questions for yourself to reflect on. And in the middle of my presentation, or in the middle of the workshop, I will do some mindfulness exercise and some reflective questions for yourself. But throughout this presentation, just think for yourself all the time, how does this work for me? And if you are a practitioner, have a think about, how would this work for my clients? So try to have that question for yourself in mind. And again, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. And I usually don't like to kind of start with saying, kind of making any kind of authoritarian or authoritative type of argument. But quite often I've heard from people ask me, okay, who are you to actually talk about this and say how it can work in clinical practice? Of course, different practitioners will find different things meaningful. And but at the same time, a lot of this presentation is like what I've boiled down from a lot of research and of the books that I've written, and also from my own clinical practice as a therapist. In my handbook, Meaning in Life, you can also find a full treatment manual of 10 sessions. And I'll go into detail in this presentation as an example. Of course, you need to find out what works for you in your context with your clients. It could be something totally different. Fair enough. But I'll be sharing my experience from my background. And I'll speak a bit now about meaning in psychological therapies in general. But then I'll mainly zoom into what I call meaning-centered therapies. And these are all the different types of therapies that systematically and explicitly address meaning in life. Then I'll talk about specific skills that may be helpful for you as a practitioner. For instance, how can you use questionnaires? How can you systematically explore different types of meaning? How can you identify meaning in the stories of your clients? How can you use experiential exercises? And very important, I'm also going to say, well, working with meaning in life is not only unique for existential therapists, but also, for instance, cognitive behavior therapists already do it. They also work with meaning in life. And I'm going to tell you how and why. But first, I will talk a little bit about meaning in psychological therapies in general. And I'm going to start with a very bold statement, is that improving meaning in life is a common factor in all effective psychotherapies and counseling or coaching. We know that, for instance, like when we look at when clients are asked, okay, how satisfied are you about the therapy or about practice, then that's way more than just an improvement, for instance, in their depression. It's way more about their own needs, which is about how can they live a meaningful life. And also when clients set their own goals for therapy, we know that will improve the outcomes, the satisfaction. And very often it's about very different things that can be very different from what therapists think can be meaningful. So it's very important to ask your clients, what do they think is meaningful? And also when I conducted a big meta-analysis on all different types of psychological therapies, not only extension, but also for instance CBT, I found there was a correlation between the outcomes on being able to live a more meaningful life and actually, for instance, depression and anxiety. So what I would say is working with meaning in psychotherapy, counseling, and coaching is like on a scale where some therapists focus on it in a very systematic, explicit way, such as myself, and there are therapists, for instance, like cognitive behavior therapists, CBT therapists, who are less systematic and who are more implicitly talking about this. I'm now going to focus first on the meaning-centered psychotherapies, who explicitly help clients to learn to live a meaningful, fulfilling life. In other words, saying yes to life, in spite of everything, by explicitly and systematically addressing meaning in life. And when I conducted this full systematic literature review meta-analysis, I found that there are 30 different schools of meaning-centered therapies. And of course, the most famous one is logotherapy, developed by Viktor Frankl. However, a lot of the different schools seem very philosophical and not evidence-based, and they're very inspiring. But a lot of the stuff is not evidence-based and not systematic and seems to be kind of subjective, like where the therapists are imposing their own ideas about meaning onto the clients, which I personally think is very unethical. So, and this is the problem where I often see that a lot of the psychotherapy training is conducted by non-clinical researchers or by non-evidence-based clinicians. And I'm trying to actually combine both my clinical practice as well as being a researcher. And this is the study I've conducted. It's a meta-analysis on all different types of meaning-centered therapies. I've conducted that together with Diego Vitali. And I've found 60 trials on meaning-centered therapies. And I found large effects on psychological stress and quality of life, hope, optimism, social well-being, and which was more or less the same in all the different samples, all the different groups of clients. And interestingly enough, is that clients seem to improve better, have better of those outcomes, when actually they improve the sense of meaning in life. So what this seems to indicate is that meaning-centered therapies improve the sense of meaning in life of clients, due to which they subsequently, their depression or anxiety or other psychological problems disappear as well. And that's precisely what we expect them to do. And that's precisely what I found. And also what we found is that there are certain therapist skills that are very helpful in making those therapies more effective. And this is also this kind of same findings for when I conducted another meta-analysis on all the clinical trials on extension therapies, where I found again that those meaning-centered therapies are the most effective types of extension therapies. So then I looked at, okay, I have all the 60 clinical trials on meaning-centered therapies that I've included in the meta-analysis. What do they have in common? So I analyzed all those different treatment manuals, all those books, and I got 5 groups of therapist competencies out of this. And think about for yourself, do you recognize those 5 groups of competencies? Do you have those therapy skills? In the first place, it seems that the therapists help clients by assessing the sense of meaning in life. For instance, is this meaning relevant for them? Then there are some meaning specific skills, such as doing specific exercises or explicitly addressing meaning. Then there's also the therapeutic relationship, because it's only when you have a deep relationship with your client that you can talk about deep topics. Then it's very important not to only stay in the head, but to focus on the experiences of the client. For instance, use mindfulness. And finally, also to be able to work with existential topics, like I've already said, how meaning in life can be very much under the pressure of, for instance, like when you're facing death, for example. And again, all the skills have been validated and evidenced, and I've published that also in the evidence-based existential therapeutic competencies framework. Whereas I would say that all existential and all meaning-centered schools should train their students in this, and each individual therapist should actually be able to obtain all of those competencies. And this is a competencies framework which is very easy for institutions to directly apply. So what I've then done is I've conducted all this research, and I've summarized it in my book, Meaning in Life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners. I summarized all of that and focused on what are the things that work. But then I thought, I started to see a trend. So I developed, in the end, in the last bit of the book, I developed this new treatment manual, where I took all the effective ingredients from all the different therapies, or from all the different meaning-centered therapies, and I created it into one new treatment manual. And then I further validated that. And for instance, currently it's in press, a study in cancer patients, but it's an approach that's now being taught at many universities worldwide. As I said, I will now zoom into some very practical aspects of this, of several things that you can do as a practitioner. First is, it can be helpful to use some questionnaires, particularly at the start of therapy. And here's an overview in this table. that you can also find in my book. These are often, most questionnaires are very generic, such as Michael Steger's Meaning in Life questionnaire. They just say whether there's meaning in life or not. They don't give an example about what are the types of meanings and how do people find meaning. That's why I've developed the Meaning Sextet questionnaire, which analyzes the different types of meaning, but also the extent to which people realize each type of meaning. And this has been validated recently in large studies. I've also developed the Meaning Attitude Scale, which analyzes the different approaches to meaning in life. And this can be very helpful, almost as a kind of a shortcut to find out what types of meanings does a client have, where do they feel frustrated in the types of meanings, and what approach to meaning do they have. And that can already give some examples or some directions how the client can improve. And very, very important is that I often do an experiential exercise with my clients. And I'm going to do that with you as well. So what we're now going to do is we're going to pretend as if you're my clients. Okay, a very, very group of clients. This group therapy is getting very big today, apparently. And no worries, you don't need to speak or share anything if you don't need to. When we're done with this exercise, I would like to invite you to write down some of your experiences that you've had during this exercise. Write it down for yourself. If you want, you can share some of your experiences with this exercise in the chat, or if you have any questions after the exercise, you can put it in the chat. Also, during this brief exercise, do not feel obliged to participate. And if you feel at any point, hey, this is not my thing, I don't like it, it's not good, well, just stop. So look after yourself. And I'm going to put up a slide, but I would like to invite you not to look at that, but really focus on your own experiences. But we'll start with a very brief mindfulness exercise, which will help you to get out of your head, stop all that rationalization, all the theorizing after me talking more than an hour. Just let's focus on your body again and on your experiences. Try to set aside all the theories. So I'd like to invite you to just sit on your chair or on your sofa, wherever you're sitting. Have nothing on your lap. Have both of your feet on the ground. And I would like to invite you, if that feels okay for you, to close your eyes. And I would like to invite you to feel how your body is touching the chair or the sofa where you're sitting. How is your body touching the chair? And how is your body feeling at this moment? Are you tired, energetic? Do you have any pains? You do not need to change anything in your body. Just observe what you're feeling at this moment. And if you can, pay some attention to your breathing. Again, you do not need to change anything in your breathing, but just observe. Just observe whether your breathing is going quick or slow, whether it's high or deep in your belly. Just observe how you're breathing. And now that you are more aware of your body, I'm going to ask you several questions for yourself to reflect on. And with those questions, just let any examples come up. And if you have one example, look for another one. But if nothing is coming up, that is also fine. So first, I would like to ask you, think of any examples in the past, in the present, or possibly in the future. Any examples of where you found meaning in some possessions, some things you owned, possibly in the success in your work or in your school or education. So any examples in the past, in the present, possibly in the future, in your material possessions or success in your work or education. And now let any examples come up from the past or possibly currently in your life. Possibly you can imagine that for your future, where you found meaning in some joyful experiences, possibly in your health, sports, or sex, or any experiences that you've been enjoying in the past, the present, possibly in the future. And now think of any examples in the past, the present, or in the future where you found meaning inside yourself. For instance, and that can be about accepting yourself, looking after yourself, possibly being creative and expressing yourself, being autonomous. So, so any meanings that you find inside yourself in the past, the present, or the future. And now think of any examples in the past, the present, or the future about your social types of meanings. So it can be about your family, your friends, possibly a community you belong to, people who you have been helping, possibly giving birth or taking care of children. So any social types of meanings in the past, the present, or the future. Just let any examples come up in you. And now think of any examples in the past, the present, or the future about any larger types of meanings in your life. So these can be very specific purposes that you may feel in your life, about your personal growth, about your life story, about justice or ethics, trying to make the world a better place. But it can also be about your spirituality or religion. But think of any examples in the past, the present, or the future about any larger types of meanings in your life. And now think of any examples of any other types of meaning in your life. And these can be about, for instance, that you find meaning in being alive, in your uniqueness, and feeling connected with the world, and your freedom or your responsibility, possibly in your gratitude towards life. So any of those more abstract philosophical types of meanings, think of any examples of that in your life. And now that you have been finding some examples of different types of meanings in your life, then try to notice for yourself what are the most important meanings in your life and what are the least important meanings in your life. So, what are the most important meanings and what are the least important meanings in your life? Okay, if you're ready, I would like to invite you to open your eyes again and come back into the room. Possibly you may want to stretch or do anything. And just take a minute for yourself to write down some of your experiences. Just write them down for yourself. If you want, you can share some of your experiences in the chat with others if you like, but don't feel obliged to do so. And I will continue in like a minute or so. Okay, try to wrap up if you're writing anything for yourself or if you want to share anything in a message, how this was for you, this exercise. I would like to see something in the chat to see whether you enjoyed this or whether it was helpful or not helpful. So anything you would like to share. Possibly while you're still writing up some things, I will continue and I will explain this exercise a little bit with you. So as you understand what I've done, of course, it's very obvious that I went systematically through the 6 different types of meaning in life. And as I often say, it's like, do as I say, not as I do. So I've now gone very quickly through all 6 types of meanings. Never do that with a client. Please don't. Because it's way too much. Because most likely you'll feel like, well, that went very quick, Joel. And yes, I did. I went very quick. And so usually I have one specific therapy session for each type of meaning. And then I will zoom into all those different examples within each type of meaning. So I would never do it like we've just done. I've just done this exercise to give you a first flavor. So I start always with an experiential exercise like mindfulness to prevent that people are too much in their head. Like Viktor Frankl used the word hyper-reflection for that. So that means that people are reflecting about the reflections. And I try to get people not to observe their life as if they're sitting in an air-conditioned hotel room, but to really take their beach towel and get onto the beach and just feel, how's it like to be on the beach? How is it like to feel the heat of being there? And that really is helpful to start with kind of mindfulness exercise like I did. And what I would usually recommend my clients is to have between 3 and 6 important examples of meaning in their life, because that will make them more resilient. For instance, when there's a pandemic and for instance, you can't go to the pub anymore, and that possibly if that was your type of meaning in life, well, and if that's your only meaning in life, then you are very frustrated. So it's important you're more resilient when you have more examples of meaning in your life. So usually I say between 3 and 6. It's also important to create a hierarchy. And that was my last question also about, okay, what are the most important meanings? What are the least important meanings? And Viktor Frankl used like a mountain range exercise for that. And I often do that with my clients with post-its, where they write one meaning per post-it. And I ask them to put them in like a hierarchy from low to high. I also stimulate my clients to at least have multiple social and large types of meaning in life, because they are the best for their mental health. But of course, I would not be imposing that on them, but I would be saying, well, hey, this is what we know from research, that will be the most fulfilling for you and most helpful in the long term. And also, if individuals struggle with realizing one meaning, remind them, hey, there's still other things in your life that are also meaningful, and possibly focus on that. Okay, so this was a little bit. Let's have a look at some of the things in the chat. I can see some people are saying that the questions were getting more and more difficult to answer. And there was some overlap between the different answers. Others say a serene experience. Yes, indeed. So it can be quite challenging to come up with examples of particularly like the social larger, or particularly of the more abstract philosophical types of meanings in life. And that's where I was saying usually I would have one specific session for each type of meaning, because this went very quick, but just to give you a flavor. And this is how I would usually work with this in therapy. In the left column, you can see the overview of the topics. Like I usually have 10 sessions. Of course, this is like when I do it in the clinical trial. When I work in my clinical practice, I would never use like a rigid structure. But for a clinical trial, in the most idealistic version of the therapy, I would first have 3 sessions where we talk about what's meaning in life, to assess the relevance of it, to see how meaning in life has changed. And then I would have 1 session for each type of meaning. And then totally in the last 2 sessions, I would look at, let's apply it in our daily lives. Let's try to make some changes. Let's actually do it. Within a session, how an effort session looks like, and that's in the right column, is that I would start with an introduction, a brief check-in, then a little bit of theory. There's a lot of psychoeducation I use. And then I usually start with a guided experiential exercise, like the mindfulness I did with you. And while people are in that mindful state, I'll ask questions like I just did with you. And then I ask people to express themselves, like I ask you to write some things in the chat. And then I would ask them, okay, now you know this, and you know that those types of meanings are important for you. Is there anything you want to do with it? Anything you want to change in your life? Okay, and how are you going to do that? And then quite often I also have some homework. And homework's mostly like already starting to reflect on some things or trying to make some changes in their lives. So I've said you can help clients find meaning via questionnaires, via systematically exploring their types of meaning in life, but also very often clients already come up with meaning in their stories. So in a very, you can say, well, when I listen to your stories, I often hear that you talk about that and that topic. And could it be that that is meaningful, that's kind of a common meaning in your life? So it's be sensitive for what clients are actually telling, and preferably ask clients themselves to say, okay, can you see a pattern in the types of meanings in the stories that you tell? And again, very important is to do those experiential exercises. Like this is a slide I've shown you before about the importance of not only talking and theorizing about meaning, but experiencing it, feeling it. And these are some research studies that are talking about the importance of using our experiences to discover what's truly meaningful for us. And also as therapists, we really, really need to use that. For example, there was my client, John. He was very much inside his head. He was intellectualizing all the time. He was very much disconnected from his emotions. So I told him that. I told him that it seems that he's so much in his head that therefore life doesn't feel meaningful. Obviously, when you're so much in your head, life doesn't feel meaningful. That makes sense. So I started to help him via some mindfulness exercises, some grounding exercise to get in touch with his feelings. And we worked very much in the here and now. So I asked him, okay, what are you feeling now? What's going on inside you now? So via that, by learning to return to his experiences, he was then able to actually also find out what's meaningful for him in his life. There's an exercise that I often do with clients. It's very simple. And I will actually do it with myself as an example. And this is a meaningful objects exercise. And this is also an experiential exercise because it asks about meaning in the here and now. And it's a very good example, and almost always this works. And so in the first step is that you ask a client, okay, can you select a meaningful object? For example, I have my coffee cup. And then I start to ask, as a therapist, I start to ask meaning-centric questions, such as what makes this object so meaningful, or what's the most meaningful aspect? As a client, I would say, well, this cup is meaningful because it has a Moroccan pattern. And it reminds me of a time in the past that I visited Morocco, and I loved that. So when I'm drinking from a coffee cup, I'm reminding myself of Morocco. As a therapist, I ask the question again. Okay, why is it so important to be reminded of Morocco? Well, that is because I really love being in other cultures and exploring. Okay, but why is that so meaningful? Well, it's so meaningful because I really love meeting people and connecting with people. Okay, what makes it so meaningful? Yeah, just other people are meaningful. Connecting with them is meaningful to me. Okay, so is that like a very fundamental type of meaning that seems to be dominant in your life? That other people are important for you? Oh, yes, absolutely. So what you can see is that via this very simple exercise, via these 2 steps, by asking continuously, like, what makes it so meaningful? Via that, we can go from the coffee cup to identifying that for me, social types of meanings are important in my life. So I would usually ask the client to describe, how would you call this type of meaning? But of course, we can use as a rule of thumb those 6 types of meanings in our life. Then I can ask, okay, if you compare it with other types of meaning, what feels more important? Or I can ask, for instance, can you give some other examples where, for instance, other social types of meanings are important? Oh, yes, absolutely. Like, for instance, giving this lecture here today. Okay. And what's the most important of those? Connecting with people during a holiday, or for instance, giving a lecture? Well, giving a lecture, obviously, that's more important. Okay. And so, and then the next step is like, okay, do you want to do this more in your daily life? For instance, that you want to lecture more in your daily life. And what do you need to do to make that happen? Well, yeah, I would like to lecture more and to do more stuff like this. Okay. So, and from there, then you can actually also with your client do some homework and say, okay, how can you make this happen? So what I often also find helpful is to ask clients, okay, put some meaningful objects around you. For instance, I've also worked a lot with clients in hospitals who are literally like lying in a hospital bed. And I asked the family to bring in some meaningful objects for them so that they have some meaningful objects around them. I often ask clients, I ask them about any meaningful objects they have, such as a watch or like a necklace. I always ask them in that very sterile environment of the hospital, I ask them, what's the meaning of that? So meaningful objects always help. That's like a shortcut to finding out a client's meaning in life. So in the last bit, in the last, let's say 3 minutes, I'm going to talk about the fact that meaning in life is not only unique for meaning-centered or existential or humanistic therapists. Because also in cognitive behavior therapy, we can also work with meaning in life. I'm also a cognitive behavior therapist, and at this moment, I'm collaborating with the Albert Ellis Institute in New York to see whether we can use second wave cognitive behavior therapy, to address meaning in life. And there's going to be a special edition of a journal on this very soon. I'll give some examples, and I'm going to go through this very quickly because this is just giving you a flavor, and more will be published on this very soon. So, as you know, in cognitive behavior therapy, there's a lot of psychoeducation. That's also what I do a lot in my therapy as well. In cognitive behavior therapy, we often look at, okay, what's rational, what's not rational. And yes, there it can be very helpful to ask a question to talk with your clients, what is a rational belief about meaning? And that is when it's based on an empirical reality. We put things in perspective. We prefer to certain meanings in a life, but we do not demand it. We're realistic about it. We're not damning, we're not judgmental of ourselves or others if we cannot fulfill our meanings in life, for instance. And if people have irrational ideas, for instance, when they're exaggerating, awfulizing, catastrophizing the sense of meaning in life, it can be helpful to identify that and help them to replace that with more helpful and more rational beliefs. I also help clients to develop a better sense of accepting themselves, of others, of experiences of life. And as you may remember from possibly some of your own training in cognitive behavior therapy, you may have had that. You know, like that's the basic ABC model that's saying, okay, you first ask a client, what's the situation, the antecedent situation. Then you ask, okay, what are you telling yourself about that situation? What's your belief about it? And what impact has it on you? For instance, I'm giving this lecture where I see that I only have 5 minutes time. So my belief is about, I'm afraid I cannot get my message across. So that's making me anxious, it's making me rush, for instance. However, that situation is always embedded. For instance, like I'm giving this lecture because I find it meaningful, and I find it important to get my message across because that's a social type of meaning. As I've already said to you, that's very important for me. So the pressure on the situation and the belief I'm having in the situation is always embedded in this wider type of meaning I have in my life, but also in the lack of resources because I only had 1 hour for this workshop. And that even is embedded in the wider existential condition in the situation where I'm aware of, okay, this is a one-off, possibly this conference. So what happens is that each situation, each belief, each consequence, all of that is embedded. And it's important when you work with a client to ask all of that. And you can see a lot of examples of that in a lot of your work with clients. You can do the same thing in like a table. This is more in the line of Aaron and Judith Beck, where you can ask clients, for instance, to write down the situation, the thoughts they had in the situation, the emotions, behavior, the outcome. But what's new in this table is that I would also ask the clients, okay, what's the meaning in the situation? What are the resources you have? And what is the existential condition that's underlying? And then on the basis of that, develop for yourself an alternative thought that's more helpful, more rational, but that is also taking into account your type of meaning. And when I use this with clients, this often helps them to really understand their sense of meaning in a lot of situations. And so this is a nice integration of CBT and working with meaning. And also when you, for instance, use schema therapy, I find it very helpful because each types of those cognitive schemas are telling about a specific type of meaning. So now I'm coming into the last slides because I've given you now several examples of how you can work with meaning with your clients. What can you do for yourself? What can you tell your clients very directly, even when you've not had all the training to become a cognitive therapist, for example? Very simple exercise for yourself. And I would recommend you after today, do that and tell this also to your clients. At the end of each day, write down the 3 most meaningful moments of the day. After 2 weeks, notice any important patterns and ask yourself what you can do to have more of these important meanings in your life. And then a second homework exercise. Plan for yourself in your diary, get your diary out, your calendar out, and write and plan some meaningful activities, at least 1 huge meaning per year, 1 large meaning per month, one medium meaning per week, and at least one small meaning per day. Finally, if you would like to learn more about how to work with meaning in psychological therapies, please visit our website from the International Meaning Events Community, meaning.org.uk. I'm offering this training. This is Discover Your Meaning in Life, learn how to make decisions, enjoy, and live your life to the fullest. This is actually for clients and possibly for yourself to learn to discover your meaning in life. And I'm using the treatment manual that I've just discussed. And we're also offering an evidence-based meaning-centered practitioner certificate, where we train people to learn how to work with clients in this way. And so it's evidence-based, and that's a big difference with other types of training because it's very much grounded in the research. And later this autumn, we're also going to offer an evidence-based existential practitioner certificate. This will all be online. We also have a monthly group, which is for free at the last Wednesday of the month, the self-development group. And finally, in our conference, I mean in our International Meaning Events community, our motto is, with our events, you'll find inspiration and community for living a meaningful life, because everybody deserves a meaningful life. And I think that is, also a big motto also for my lecture today. And I really hope that that's also something you'll experience in this conference, this very inspiring, very meaningful conference, is that you'll be able to learn more about how to live a meaningful life, and that you learn how to help your clients live a more meaningful life, because everyone is worth living a meaningful life, both you and your clients. So thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for sharing experiences in the chat. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me, for instance, via my own personal website. And these are some of the books I've written. And I wish you a very inspirational and very meaningful rest of your conference.